We're going to kick off after lunch with Senator Roberts. You have the call, Senator.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for appearing again today. My questions are concise and straightforward, and the answers, I hope, will be similar. In the context of the mass release from immigration detention of approximately 150 non-citizens awaiting to be deported, how many of these detainees were in fact released as a result of the decision in NZYQ?
We're just getting the relevant officers to the table, Senator.
Good afternoon, Senator. In answer to your question about the releases, the recent releases from immigration detention, all of them were as a result of the new tests set by the High Court in NZYQ.
Sorry, I can't hear you very well.
Sorry, apologies. All of the releases from detention that we're talking about with NZYQ were as a result of the new High Court test set in that case.
Thank you.
Around the real prospect of removal from Australia in the reasonably foreseeable future.
Thank you. Is it true that 37 of these men released into the community have a history of sexually offending, including against children?
Senator, as of the 30th of April 2024, 39 of those individuals did have a previous conviction for sexually based offending.
Thank you. Is it true that 7 of these men were convicted of either murder or attempted murder?
That's correct, Senator.
Is it true that 72 of these men had convictions for assault or violent offending, armed robbery or kidnapping?
Senator, as of the 30th of April, that number is 73.
73, thank you. How many of these released detainees have now illegally reoffended?
Senator, I believe the Deputy Commissioner answered that question earlier today, but I'll pass.
What's the number?
29, Senator.
Thank you. What offences have been included in the range of charges, including the senior citizen brutally bashed and allegations of a sexual predator being active here?
We did provide that evidence before the lunch break.
We went through that in some detail before the lunch break.
Okay, well, let's do it. You're aware of Mr. Emmanuel Saki, a recently released Sudanese man who was released from immigration detention. He's just been charged with the murder of another man here on May 12th this year. That was 2 weeks ago. You're aware of that?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. What's now being done, Minister, to deport these men?
Well, you're mixing together a couple of different categories of people here.
We don't want them here.
Well, I'd point out to start with that all 153, I think it is, people who were released from detention as a result of the High Court decision, the government actually had those people in detention for a reason. So we don't want them roaming the streets either, but the High Court has made a decision and we're bound by the law. And
Can you deport these men?
Well, for starters, as we've gone through before, there are a range of protections in place for the Australian community surrounding these people, such as electronic bracelets, curfews, a range of other requirements that no government has ever imposed on a cohort released from detention. Obviously, also, in relation to the NZYQ cohort, the government is in the process of applying for preventative detention orders, which would effectively see those people return to detention. And again, before the lunch break, there were some questions about where that was up to. So that's the NZYQ cohort.
But there's been nothing done to deport them?
No, because, well, I would say that one of the reasons is that the reason for the High Court decision is that the High Court found that there was no reasonable prospect of those people being deported because, for example, they were stateless. They don't have citizenship in any country. So it is not possible legally to deport them. And again, I'm paraphrasing, officials can jump in if I explain some of this incorrectly. So that's the reason why those people haven't been deported, and that's the reason why they're now not in detention but subject to all those other protections.
So all of the 150 odd are stateless?
I don't think all of them are, but there are other reasons that it's not possible to deport them. which the officials might be able to explain to you.
So, Senator, it might be because we have protection obligations for them. It could be because they're stateless. It might be because there's issues with their identifying their identity with their country of origin. But all of that culminates in there being no real prospect of their removal from Australia in the foreseeable future.
And then, Senator Roberts, you asked about the Saki case. That's a separate situation. So, as far as I'm aware, Mr Saki is not one of the NZYQ cohort. He was someone who had come to Australia, was given a visa at some point along the line, that the government cancelled his visa because of character issues or criminal offences, whatever exactly the reasons were. He appealed that decision to the AAT. The AAT overturned the decision to cancel his visa. He was therefore...
Minister, is that because of any influence of Minister Giles' Directive 99?
Well, I guess we've spent the best part of 2 days discussing this, and what I have been saying is that the direction that Minister Giles gave did ask government decision makers and the AAT to take into account the length of time someone had been here in Australia.
And their ties.
But not at the expense of the seriousness of their offending. But the AAT has done what it's done. And for that case and other cases, they have overturned the government's decision to cancel those visas, despite the fact the government in the AAT argued for the cancellation of those visas. And now Mr Saki's visa has been cancelled by the Minister, and he is seeking urgent advice from the Department about the range of other cases that have come to light in the last couple of days.
Minister, before Senator Roberts, you continue, look, I don't want to be too hardline about this because I know that there's different sections of the department that deal with both of these issues, but Senator Roberts, just for your information, we have moved on to outcome 3. I know that there might be some crossover that the department will seek to answer your questions when they can. We did have extensive questioning about outcome 2 from yesterday onwards. We're now in outcome 3, and if that needs to be clarified at the table for senators, and if you can assist Ms Foster when questions arise, but dealing with the different cohorts, I know it's difficult, but we'll do our best to try to keep on track in that way. Senator Roberts, have you got a question? That
Was the migration amendment, the removal and other measures, Bill 2024, simply to ensure incarceration as an alternative to being detained for these men?
Well, again, I might begin the answer and let officials explain further. The removals legislation that the government has introduced and has not yet been passed by the Senate, and the opposition has not agreed to pass yet, is for a different purpose. It was to deal with a different gap in our legal system. So maybe officials could pick up at that point with some more detail.
So, Senator, there were 2 primary purposes to the removals bill. The first was to give us the power to compel people who had exhausted all legal avenues of remaining in Australia to cooperate with their removal, so that people couldn't frustrate our efforts to remove them by, for example, refusing to fill out applications or come to interviews, and to make it an offence should they not do that. The second element of the bill was to allow us to declare countries who frustrated our attempts to return their nationals to them, to declare them countries of removal concern, and for us to be able to take action about how we manage applications to come to Australia from those countries.
Surely, Minister, there was a way that the government could have addressed this issue before the decision in NZYQ was handed down. Why didn't you?
Well, the High Court's decision in NZYQ essentially went in a different direction to what the law in Australia had always been.
So you didn't preempt that at all?
Look, we've gone over this at length in previous estimates hearings and...
Okay, let's move on to border security then. Why is our border security policy being made on the run? For example, why has the number of surveillance flights by Border Force of our northern borders by aircraft been reduced over the last year?
Can I just say one thing? Of course, I don't accept the proposition that our border security policy is being made on the run. We have increased funding for Border Force and border security to a level no government has ever provided. And Admiral Sonta, in his role heading up the Operation Sovereign Borders, has pointed out that there's, I can't remember the exact words, but essentially there's been no change to the policy settings for Operation Sovereign Borders. But the officials can talk to you about surveillance flights.
Specifically to surveillance flights, Senator, I've got Commissioner Dale with me. There has been a reduction in hours flown. That's for two reasons. One is persistent mechanical issues with the fleet of Dash 8s that the Border Force has, and secondly, with the contractor that we employ, their ability to bring on pilots. There's a global shortage of pilots and they're affected by that. But I might hand over to Deputy Commissioner Dale just to give you more details.
Thank you. Kayleen Dale, Deputy Commissioner, Strategy and Capability Group in the Australian Border Force. So the Commissioner has flagged that we have, there has been a reduction in flying hours this year. And the causes the Commissioner has already outlined. I think the Rear Admiral will go to the point that, notwithstanding the reduction in hours that we have had in the Australian Border Force, aerial surveillance has been maintained to the standard he requires, fortunately through the augmentation of flights through the Australian Defence Force.
Is that signalling a decrease in hours flown in future then, if it meets the standard? Or is it going to be future standards changed?
No, Senator. We're working very closely with the provider to better understand the barriers. The Commissioner has spoken to the issue around crew, and there is a global shortage of crew for the fixed-wing aircraft that we're operating. It's also true that from time to time we have mechanical issues that are reasonably frequent with any sort of piece of machinery, so they can sometimes be a factor.
So is the reduction in hours flown a reason for the recent increase in number of successful arrivals into Australian waters of foreign people smugglers and their human cargo?
Senator, Rear Admiral Brett Sonner, the Commander of Operation Sovereign Borders and the Commander of Maritime Border Command. There's no direct correlation there. On a regular basis, I look at what is the threat and risk, and I adjust the posture accordingly. As Kayleen Dale indicated, one of the beauties about this role and the coordination role is I have both ABF and Australian Defence Force assets to pull on for this mission. And so whilst she's articulated the decrease from the ABF-funded actual air surveillance, but we've increased the ADF air surveillance to ensure that we have an enhanced posture in the northwest.
Thank you. Minister, is it the soft policy of the Labor Party in the past, Labor Party governments in the past, enticing people smugglers to just be prepared to risk the boat and cargo for such rich profits of a full boat of paying passengers for the Aussie Express?
No. Never has been, never will be.
Are you aware, Minister, that Australians now... Sorry, Chair?
I'm going to give you a wind-up in a second, Senator Roberts, if you have a couple other questions.
Are you aware, Minister, that Australians now feel unsafe personally in their own country due to this failed migration policy?
Well...
We've got boats arriving, we've got people murdering people.
I'm sure there are some people in Australia who feel unsafe. What I can say is that this government is spending more money on border security than we've ever done before. Unlike certain others, including people in the room, we are not running down and disparaging our border security policies, which is an incentive to speak people smugglers. And we are taking action to deal with court decisions that are not of the government's making and that the government opposed.
Minister, isn't just quoting of spending more money just a lazy way of saying you're trying to do something? But I look at your energy policy and I see never before have we spent so much money and we see the highest price of
Senator
electricity.
Roberts, that's not
Well,
relevant to these
Money,
instruments.
my point
And I
is
did
money
give
does
you
not equate to
Senator
success.
Roberts.
You might say that spending $569.4 million more in this year's budget on things like more boats, planes and unmanned vehicles for Operation Sovereign Borders is lazy. I wouldn't put it that way.
Thanks, Minister. Thank you, Senator
Thank you,
Roberts. I
Chair.
do need to share the call.